Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Steel and Whiskey. I'm your host, David Zapka. I have today here with me Chris Riley. Chris is a longtime detailer, longtime user of SDS2. How you doing today, Chris?
Good.
Good, very good. So first things first, very important part of Steel and Whiskey here is that first part, second part, whiskey. So I think Chris has some good whiskey that you're drinking on there today, don't you, Chris? What do you got?
Yeah, we got some Willie's Canadian.
Willie's Canadian. I have never had Willie's Canadian, I don't believe.
It's distilled in a little distillery in Ennis, Montana.
Montana.
Yeah, it's interesting. You go to the website and read about them. It's an interesting story.
How can it be Canadian if it's not distilled in Canada?
It's the way they distill it, I guess. I don't know. It's good though.
I think that's
it's kind of neat,
thing, right? Yeah, it's the way they distill it.
The guy that draws it, they put a sticker on there and they put their name on it and the date that they pulled it from the barrel and stuff. So
it's kind of neat. Okay, very good, very good.
It's good whiskey.
Good whiskey. Okay. Well, I enjoy a good Canadian whiskey. So in fact, I'm drinking Whistle Pig. So actually still sipping on a bottle that I had won off of Doug Evans a while back. He won a bet on the Huskers last year. So I kind of told that story a while back on another episode here that we had, and still drinking on that same bottle. So it's getting near the end though. So it's a good Canadian rye whiskey is what this one is. So yeah, pretty good.
Yep. I drink Pendleton's most of the time, and Pendleton has a rye whiskey.
Yep.
And they make a good Canadian whiskey as well. But yeah.
Very good. Very
cool.
Good. Well, Chris, why don't you mind giving the audience here a little background on yourself, little history? What's your experience?
Oh my goodness, it goes way back. I'm gonna be 63 this year.
We don't give away any secrets. Nobody needs to know, that much of specifics. But so you've got a few years under your belt, that little experience.
I started learning this trade from my dad in probably around 1974. I was 14 years old, and there was a 10-speed bicycle I really wanted really bad. And he said, well, you're going to have to work for that. And you're going to have to get a loan. So I think it was like $100 bicycle, which in 1974 is pretty expensive. And so he made me go to the bank, and he co-signed on the loan. And then after school, he worked for Bud Dugan, a detailing office in Grable, Wyoming, just north of where I live, a few miles. And he was chief draftsman, and he says, you can come down and you can learn how to letter, and you can learn how to scrub drawings. So, and run blueprints. So that was where it all started. But yeah, my dad, he started in 1957 in Mobile, working for Mobile Steel Company. That's where he learned. But so anyway, I did that off and on through high school, scrubbing drawings, learning how to letter.
So before we go any further, this is a really good story, and I had not heard most of this story before, so very interesting to me. Did you get the bike?
Yeah.
You did.
I rode the tires off that bike.
So you had to get a loan. What'd you do? You just worked the loan off?
Yeah, I would work after school. I would come down there and scrub drawings for a couple hours a day. Of course, being 14, some days you showed up, some days you didn't. But if you didn't show up, you didn't get no money.
That's right.
So, but I think my payment on that bike was like $5 or $6 a month. So And of course, I was probably making $1.50 an hour or something. Who knows? But
Sure. Yeah. Different times, wages and the way we talk about money is quite a bit different as far as the value goes, and that is quite a bit different today. But anyway, sorry, I just had to know if you got that bike as
Oh yeah.
part of the
Oh
story.
yeah.
You got the bike, so okay. So then
So yeah,
I
I
guess
did
continue
that
on.
through high school, off and on here and there. And after high school, I went to work for a construction outfit at a plant north of town here, erecting steel and pouring concrete, just general labor type stuff. So the steel was not foreign to me by then because I kind of knew what it looked like on paper. And then joined the Coast Guard in 1980. Where economy was in bad shape then, and so got laid off out there. So I joined the Coast Guard, spent 4 years in the Coast Guard, anywhere from California, Honolulu, the Bering Sea on a Coast Guard cutter, working in the engine room. Did that for 4 years. Got out, came back to work for my dad at Computer Line Steel Detailing, and by then he had purchased SDS2 in 1983, and
So
he was
1983, he purchased SDS2, is it?
actually, I think it was December. Yeah, I think it was December '83, somewhere in there.
No kidding. So,
Yeah.
if memory serves me correct, if I'm not mistaken, the software was first created in 1981.
Yeah,
So
it was
your
SDS1, I think, was the original. And
SDS. So I think, was it SDS1 or was it just SDS?
I think it was SDS1. That's what I've
Really?
always heard it called. But
Okay. Okay.
but I think Roscoe Steel, which is now True North Steel up in Billings, and I think Tom Kramer had SDS1, I believe. Could be
Yeah. So
mistaken, but
I do recall Roscoe Steel is customer number one here for us. So yeah, that's so your dad. So your dad and Computer Line could not have been too far off from that customer number one then, if I had to guess, huh?
yeah, the contract. I still have the contract. It's a three-page legal contract, double
No kidding.
spaced, and
Yeah.
it says 002 at the top. So it was license 002 of SDS2.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
I think Roscoe had gotten into SDS2. They had moved from 1 to 2 before my dad purchased it, and maybe Tom Kramer did too down there at Industrial. But
Okay.
but
Very good. So
about version 2, late version 2, early version 3 is when I started.
Got it. Okay. So started detailing to pay off a loan for a bike, little construction work, went to the Coast Guard. Now you're back working for your dad and Computer Line. Where's it go from there?
Well, we only had the one station. As a matter of fact, I dug up an old picture. That's what the first hardware looked like. And that right below my middle finger there on the right of the picture that's the hard drive. And that sucker weighed 85 pounds. It was a rack mount.
Yeah.
And it was only 16.5 megabytes.
Boy, that's a blast from the past, isn't it?
Wow. Yeah, and there was a single monitor that was black and white. I think it was a 14-inch on the old 98 236 HP machines.
Yeah.
A whopping 256K of RAM.
It's amazing how far things have come, isn't it?
Yeah,
they get a thumb
crazy.
drive, this big, that's like 5 terabytes now. I carry it around in my pocket,
Yeah, it's got everything you can put on it and still have room. But back then you had to coordinate your pin colors by pin numbers and your line types by line numbers. So that's how you kept track of, okay, yellow is number 3. So that's how you coordinated. So when it plotted it all came out correctly. Looking at the line weights. And there was no 3D modeling back then. It was all you built your erection plan on basically your sheet outline,
Okay.
and you made a reference point on the plan and a reference elevation. When you saved it, it asked you for those. So you would set your reference point and tell it what elevation that plan was. And then, like if you were doing a big structure that was like a shopping mall or something, your reference point might be way off the screen somewhere, because you'd have to, it has to be common. If you're match lined, it had to be a common point in the structure that reference point did. And then you processed, and you only processed one time. Once you processed, you're done. Everything else had to be done with the drawing editor, which was called interactive graphics then. And but whenever it processed, it would take those reference points and elevations, and virtually it would stack all that. You couldn't see it, but that's how it, so that it knew to splice columns and, you know, all that kind of stuff, which it didn't do column splices, but you got a shaft with a plain end on it.
Yeah.
And it didn't do base plates. You had to do those with a sub pick. They called it. That was the precursor to the job standard, was a sub pick.
Okay.
And
so I got to remind the audience, this was 40 years ago now, right?
Yeah, about just about.
Yeah. So
yeah, 35, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a long time. And
no kidding.
But yeah, that was that was fun. It was interesting learning. The computer really intrigued me too. That's the thing that kept me in it. Although I did like drawing on the board, I still, there's an art to that, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But and I got a couple of 3 years of good steady board work in. So, but of course with one computer, you know, only one guy could run it at a time. So.
Right.
But yeah, and then I think when version 4 or 4.5, I think, is where the 3D stick came in, where you could see things in 3D, but it was just a bunch of sticks. You couldn't turn anything solid. You couldn't see any material or anything like that. And then I think 5 is whenever the solid started coming in.
Okay.
And then of course 6 was when Windows came out, somewhere early 2000, late 1999, probably 99 was when Windows probably started getting introduced. Because before that we were all on HP Basic or HP Unix, you know. But
well,
yeah,
that's wild to think about. So I remember I think the first home computer we had when I was growing, so I don't want to age myself here either. But so growing up, I think the first home computer we had in our home had a Windows 95 operating system on it. So it's it's amazing to think about how far we've come.
I think when we converted over to Windows, it was Windows XP, which we always called Windows Extra Problems, was what XP stood for.
I think, I don't know about that. XP was
it got pretty stable after a while, though. Yeah,
like it had a pretty long lifespan, so they had quite a while to stabilize that. Once they did, I think it was pretty bulletproof, I'd say.
Yeah. Course, and then of course back then, before we went to Windows, everything was done with a coax cable, all your networking. And before that, the early networking was done with an HPIB cable, which is about the size of your thumb, about that big around, and it had great big ends on it, and you daisy chained them together. And it's no wonder it's a wonder the data made it through that fat of a cable, that much copper, you know. There's no telling what the resistance was on that, but yeah, it's of course back then, way back, started with a pin plotter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember in 80, must have been around 86. Of course, you couldn't even buy a job back then. The work was so bad, so slow. And Tom Kramer called my dad and had a coal-fired power plant in China that he was working on and needed some help, but it had to be plotted on Mylar. And so that kind of narrowed it down to having to be, the computer could, do that great, the plotters and stuff. But man, that wore the tips out on them pins so fast that Mylar did. And I remember my dad finally found a place that had tungsten tip pins. And
Really?
they lasted a lot longer than just the regular pins, but they were expensive.
Why did it have to be printed on Mylar? Do you know?
I don't know. It was, I guess, Tom's customer. That was a requirement of the job.
Really interesting.
And you could ink it on Mylar by hand, but look at how long that would take. Because you had, and but yeah, that job helped us out of a slump because we didn't have anything to do. And but yeah, Tom's been a good friend a long time.
Very good. Well, we always say it, and I feel like it comes up a lot on this podcast here, but it's just the steel industry in general is just it's big, but it's very small. Like, it seems like everybody knows everybody, and most of it's, very good people within the industry, and
Yep.
a lot of times you're competitors, but gosh, there's always somebody right there to help you out, whether it be coaching you along or throwing you work or, sharing secrets, whatever it is, or there's always somebody willing to help out. So
there was a lot of customers that came of which was design data back then. People that wanted to purchase, but they didn't want a CAN demonstration from design data. So they would fly here to little old Graybull, Wyoming. I'm in Basin, which is just 7 miles south of where the office was then. And in flying into here is like, for me to fly to Lincoln, like to the users group, it's an all day thing.
Yeah.
By the time I switch planes, fly to Denver, switch planes, sit in an airport, fly to Minneapolis, sit in an airport, then fly to, Omaha or Lincoln. So that's why I always drove to the users group, because it took me 12 hours to drive, and why not?
Sure.
It's going to take it. So, if you don't mind driving, which you can run 80, 85 on the interstate. So it wasn't too bad, but yeah, people would fly into this little old town, and my dad, we'd do a little demonstration and show them what it did. And there was a lot of sales made doing that, and a lot of that helped SDS2 grow to what it is. But and we didn't mind doing it, because we always looked at it as the more people that have SDS2, the more people that are going to want their drawings made on SDS2. So that would help us out, So it was kind of a two-way street there. So
win-win for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So where are you at today then? What's Chris doing today?
Well, after the Coast Guard, and I stayed with, computer line. I worked at Roscoe Steel for a short bit of time there in the mid 90s, in their drawing room, running jobs and stuff, and then came back to work for my dad at computer line, and stayed with that until 2000. He had a stroke and wasn't able to work after that. And by then, I told him when I came back from Roscoe, I said, you need to start stepping away and enjoying your life, So he did a lot of fishing. he would,
can't blame him for that. I'd like to do a lot more fishing than what I get to do. I
of
know
course,
that.
the Bighorn River flows by town here it flows north towards the Yellowstone River, and he would get his stool and his fishing rod and go down there and sit on the bank.
Yeah. I think that's my retirement dream as well.
If he caught something, it was fine. If he didn't, that was fine too. But anyway, so 2000, I kind of got thrust into running computer line full time, and of course 2001, everything that happened in that, and of course the economy was in bad shape again. And I had at one time I think we had 14 licenses running, and by then I'd let everybody go because I mean we couldn't find any work. I was bidding work, but nobody was letting it. Kind of like now. And so it just got down to me. So I was living over here 7 miles south of where the office was. So I just said, well, I just as well move the office home. So did that, remodeled a two-car garage into an office, and then got a couple of my guys back, a couple of my lead guys, and built it back up to about 4 or 5 people, and it was good then because we were 2003 or 4, we started using Bluebeam. We got into Bluebeam. It was like $150 for a license.
Yeah.
And it was, man, I had been looking for something like Bluebeam for years. It's like, get away from this paper and these big old bed sheet drawings. And
yeah,
so started buying monitors and licenses of Bluebeam. And
so this was about what, 20 years ago?
Yeah, it'd have been 2003, 2004,
okay.
Yeah, probably 4. Justin Lynn and I were discussing this the other day on Discord about what, because he worked for me, him and his brother Nathan.
Yeah.
And the best we could figure, it was probably about 2004.
Yeah. When
we got into Bluebeam, and I had one of those 8825 Xerox printers with the big scanner, and for scanning the big drawings. And I put that thing out on the internet to sell it. Didn't get any bites. And there was a guy from a town about 30 miles from here that did surveying for canal companies and stuff, and mapping and things. And he'd always come up and get prints made or send his secretary up. And she come up one day and I run the prints. I says, why don't you tell Tom to buy this from me?
Yeah.
She says, well, how much you want for it? And I mean, it's like a $30,000 machine when it was new. And I said, I'll sell it for $4,000. And she says, well, I'll let him know. So about 2 days later, she called me back and he said he'd give you $400 for it. I said, he can have it and I'll deliver it. I want it out of my office. I don't use it anymore. And my accountant, he said, it's all depreciated out. So take whatever you can get for it.
Yeah.
So I loaded it up on my little flatbed trailer and I hauled it down there and unloaded it in his office, and haven't seen it since.
There you go.
And never looked back. I've been paperless ever since. So that, that'd have been probably 2006 or 7, probably, I guess.
Okay. Yeah.
And I haven't used a drawing since then.
A physical drawing.
Yeah. And
all been
matter
all
of fact,
from
my little 8.5 by 11 printer is sitting over here on the floor. I don't even print with that anymore.
Sure.
I mean,
well, I can't tell you the last time I printed something here in the office. I don't know. So, no need to. It's all PDF, electronic.
But we were doing back then, Nathan and Justin and I, and had another guy, Casey, working for me. There was 4 of us, and we were model checking, and then Nathan was kind of the 2D, the QC guy that would make the final look over of the drawings and stuff. And that's the way we did every job. We modeled, a couple of us would model, and then a couple of us would model check the other guy. And then we'd, Nathan would sit over there, and that's what he liked to do, was clean up the drawings. So that and he would be looking at the contract drawings, and while he was cleaning them up and make sure he's, and we wallpapered as a 24 by 24 garage that we turned into an office, and we wallpapered 3 walls, and we're working on the ceiling with trophy sheets, isometrics of all the jobs we'd done in there.
Yeah.
And every one of them had been model checked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That had been, I kind of want to, I wish I could see that wallpaper. I bet that would be neat.
Yeah. We just took and stapled them up,
Yeah.
wherever they would fit,
Yeah.
which I don't have none of that stuff anymore, but.
Sure. Yeah.
But, yeah, it can be done, but you have to work as a team.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You can't have people coming in and out. You've got to have a core team that works on that project, especially if it's a big project, and we usually ran 2, maybe 3 jobs at a time together, the 3 of us. I tried not to get too overbooked because it gets too hard to manage after that, but yeah, we had a pretty good little system going.
Nice. Yeah.
But
very good.
You just have to think outside the box to make this stuff work with STS2. And so that's where all my weird ideas come up with member properties and everything, is I'm thinking outside the box.
Oh, I don't think they're weird. They're not weird at all.
Well, they're not weird, but trying to push the system so that down that 2D end, I don't have as much to think about. It's like, I got field notes that I can add to a member, and then when I do my e-drawings, that field note's right there,
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, it works pretty good.
I wouldn't say it's thinking outside the box. I would say it's utilizing it to the best of your ability, right?
Yeah.
Pushing the limits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of projects you working on today? Anything interesting?
Oh, doing a little school up in New York, a little private preparatory school. It's a little 3-story building. Okay. Kind of actually relatively simple. It's got some mesh handrail, in the stairwells, but actually, a nice little job. Let's see, I worked on some stuff down at the Air Force Base in Florida. Just finished that up. It was a drone support facility. I think it got wiped out in that hurricane that went through Panama City.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think this was a rebuild of it.
Got it. That makes sense.
I think it's just a maintenance for the Air Force where they have drones that they tow behind another plane for targets.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's what they do with that.
Interesting.
But
yeah. Okay.
The Navy used to do that with us when we were in the Coast Guard. They'd have a drone barge they'd pull behind a ship like a mile or so, and then you'd shoot at it. And you weren't supposed to hit it. You were supposed to just hit close to it.
Yeah.
And I remember in the chow line one afternoon, because we were playing war with the Navy. It was called refresher training. And the fire control technician, he was a weird dude. He was just one of those weird, like a gun nut, he's always thinking about. And he told me in the chow line, he says, they tell me I'm missing that barge. I'm shooting too far away. He says, I'm going to sink it after lunch. And he did. He hit it dead center. Sunk that target barge.
he was probably hitting where he was aiming all along, right? They just didn't know where he was aiming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. Anyway.
That's funny. Yeah.
But yeah, the bigger jobs have seemed to have kind of gone by the wayside recently.
A little bit, yeah.
The last big job, which it's still going on, is a high school down in in Georgia, and I think there's like a couple thousand students in that school. But it had a couple of nice trusses in it. Weighed 70 tons a piece. The trusses did.
Yeah.
And some nice work. Still trying to finish up little things on it, like roof frames and that kind of stuff for roof drains and RTU units and things. There's several hundred roof frames in this thing. That's how big it is.
Wow.
I mean, it's as big as a shopping mall.
Wow. Yeah,
it's got a big footprint. It's, 12 or 1,500 tons in it, I think, total.
Okay. Good size project then.
Lots of CMU walls and joist and bearing plates and thousands of them.
Interesting.
But it had some good structural in it too, in the auditorium and the administrative part, So
sure.
It's gymnasium. But and then we did the it was up there in Tennessee, Clarksville. It's Clarksville, Tennessee. And we did in a big arena up there back in 2019, 2020. I worked on that one. That was a big job. That was hockey and basketball and all 9 yards. But yeah, it was. I think it's called the FMC Bank Arena now. I think they sold the naming rights to it.
Got it. Yeah.
But
so
that was a good job.
Yeah. So if you can think back all the projects you've done over your career, so it's probably a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
What's the favorite? What's your favorite project you've worked on your entire career?
I would say.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I probably got several if I really think about it. But we did a plastics plant for Central Texas Ironworks back. This would have been back in the late 90s. I think it was 6,000 tons, give or take.
Wow.
All galvanized, whole job. And I think we worked on that thing about probably a year. And that was an interesting job because CTIW was interesting to work for because everything was barcoded back then.
And this was in the 90s?
This was in the late 90s.
Okay.
You can ask Doug about Central Texas Ironworks because
I'm familiar.
He has told me that is probably one of the most impressive shops he's ever been in.
Yeah, they're pretty big.
Because them guys knew how to handle steel, and
not just little steel either. They handle the big steel there.
Yeah. But I guess their barcode system was a case study at like Texas A&M University that they developed themselves.
No kidding.
But they had tags for everything, and they could tell you where that piece was in any word of the process until even if it was up in the air or not. They could tell you if it was laying in the yard, if it was laying on a truck in the yard, if it was at the galvanizer, if it was galvanized and sitting at the galvanizer waiting to be picked up. If it was at the job site, if it was shook out on the ground somewhere, they could tell you exactly where every piece of steel was at any given time. And it was impressive. They were good people to work with.
Yeah, good.
But
very good. Everybody I know from there is a good person, great person.
Yeah, Roy Eaton. I think Roy Eaton is running it now. I always liked old Roy. He was
great
just a
dude.
just a good guy. But yeah, that one probably sticks out in my mind. And we did some modules for the Athabasca Oil Sands project in Canada, way up in North Alberta for them. And that was an entire oil refinery that was built from scratch.
Really?
And
So what makes these your favorite? Is it because of the experience you had working for CTIW in that, or what aspect of the project makes it your favorite?
well, yeah, working for CTIW was, I mean, that was a good experience because I mean, if you had a question, you got an answer.
Hmm.
There was no, I mean, things happened. And the industrial work is, I always tended to like to do the industrial work,
Okay,
um, as opposed to the commercial. Um, Things are usually a little more straightforward.
sure.
Um, and there used to be, I don't know if it's that much anymore, but it used to be, you ask a question, you got an answer because those people want that plant producing whatever it's going to do, you
Yep,
know, because it's costing money if it ain't up and running. So
yep.
there was that incentive. I mean, the ones that I seen move the fastest were gold mines. If you're working on processing equip buildings and stuff for gold mines, because those people wanted that gold processed as quick as
Right,
possible,
right.
and so worked on a copper mine down in Peru, and that was a CTIW job. It was at 15,000 feet above sea level.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it was copper, but I think it was gold and just any kind of ore. But um,
Sure.
and they would make a slurry out of it and shoot it down to the coastline and load it on ships, the slurry, and take it somewhere to be processed.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so yeah, um, but yeah, that wasn't it. We didn't do that whole thing. We just did bits and pieces of that one, just some of the smaller mill buildings and stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
But worked on some stuff in Singapore, Kuwait, whenever they started rebuilding after the Gulf War over there, the
Hmm.
Gulf War One, I think it was. We did a lot of refinery work over there. M.W. Kellogg, which I don't think they're in the, I think they've been bought out, but they were the engineers on it and did a lot
Okay.
of pipe racks for over there in Kuwait
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, CTIW had their fingers in all over the world on
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So you never knew what you were going to be working on. But but it was always industrial work, and it was usually always galvanized, and a lot of times it was refinery work. It was uh, had 2 inches of concrete, shotcrete on it too.
Hmm.
So it would go from the galvanizer. It would go to a place to get concrete put on it.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
and for fireproofing it, I
Yeah.
guess. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and so all your connections had to clear that 2 inches of concrete.
Right.
So you had to take that
Interesting.
into account. But
Interesting. Huh.
but yeah, it's
Okay, so then those are some of your favorite projects.
what am I?
Let's flip it. Let's flip it. What is do you remember just like a nightmare story, or what's your least favorite project you've worked on?
I don't
You
know.
got
I don't
something
know
like
that it
you
would
got
be
one
my
like that?
least favorite, but it was probably the toughest as far as detailing goes, just because. And this was in like 1988, I guess, and it was a retooling of a steel mill in Gary, Indiana, for a joint venture between Inland Steel and Nippon Steel. And the design drawings we were working from came from Japan, and they were a direct translation into English.
Okay.
And so uh, we had to convert the steel to U.S. steel sizes or something close, whatever was close to.
Yeah.
And they were really just presentation drawings, like something like an engineer would present to the customer that, oh, here's my idea. That's what we were working from. And this thing was like 8 floors high, and it was like 900 feet from one end to the other, 800 feet from one end to the other. It was all inside of another building. And you had 2 rows you had 2 columns, and then you had 2 columns over here. And on each one of those floors is where the equipment for the rolls for the sheet steel turned. And there's a big electric furnace down the middle. And it was a pickle line for sheet steel, probably for the automotive industry, I guess. But anyway, this steel went from the bottom up to the top of this thing and just threaded for like 900 feet from one end to the other.
Really?
Yeah, into this electric furnace. And that's all I know about it. But but it was, the drawings said the electric furnace company on the drawings.
Yeah.
But we had one guy, of course, this would have been like probably version 3 when we were doing this, late version 3, maybe 4, but I think it was 3. And those columns, you had 2 columns that were built as a frame, and they went up 2 floors, and then there was a cap plate and then a base plate, and then 2 more columns go up. So you had these vertical bents, for lack of a better term, just a vertical truss. And then you had outriggers with bolted moment flange plates for a horizontal truss that went with a platform to set the equipment on, went from column to column. So you had vertical frames and horizontal frames. Everything was just, it was very interesting, very difficult detailing job, because there was no SDS2 connections pretty much in any of it.
Yeah.
We had one guy that all he did it was well over 6 months. All he did was detail checker plate.
Really?
Yeah. And every piece of checkered plate had to be cut out for all the motors and the rolling motors that sat.
Yeah.
And we were getting faxes directly from Japan giving us the outline, the bolt pattern for all this equipment, because all the holes had to be drilled so that the equipment would fit. And I think, gosh, I bet we had a stack of fax. This is when the fax machine, we were still doing grease paper for faxes. There was no plain paper fax yet. Or if there was, it was, if you had one, that was pretty cool, And I bet you there was probably a stack of faxes that were probably 2 foot thick.
Yeah.
Of all the different pieces of equipment and stairs. There was stairs everywhere. I think my dad detailed the stairs by hand on the board, and he had a stair program that he wrote inside of an HP 95 calculator. It's the one that had the little card reader on it and a tape readout. And he wrote a program to do stairs, and he had these blanks that he had sepia'd, and all you had to do was draw the top and the bottom condition and then fill in, and this stair program would print out, and all the things you needed to know about the stair were numbered. And he would print out for each stair. He'd give the stair a number, and he'd staple that print out to the drawing, to the blueprint for the checker. And
hey, that's pretty clever. That's interesting.
That's how I learned how to do stairs, was how my dad drew those, because we did them in SDS2 when it got to where we were. He got to where he sat behind the computer eventually, and he drew the bottom condition, and then he drew a top condition, and he had them all labeled for the like a break over at the top, or come up and bolt to a beam, or bolt to floor, or break at the bottom. Because there's only like 4 or 5 different conditions on a stair.
Yeah.
Top and bottom.
Right.
So he had them drawn as a sub pick back then, and the reference point was the work point of the nosing. So he drew them as job standards, and so then he would run his calculator program, and the body of the stair was a job standard. So he would create a detail, bring the body in as a, and then he would say, okay, I need a B2L, for the bottom, and those reference points matched.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he would run his calculator and he would just fill in the blanks and then
Interesting.
draw his copes or, whatever he had to do at the top or the bottom, he'd finish it out. And,
Clever.
and that's how I learned how to dimension stairs.
Yeah.
Because before I was born, this had been the late 50s, he left Mobile Steel Company where he learned how to detail after a few years, and he went north to Birmingham. There's a lot of detail in sweatshops up there. I think he went to work for Menifee and Smith, the best of my knowledge. I got an old Smoley's, his original Smoley's book here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
inside the front, he kept track of everywhere he worked
Really?
and how long he worked there.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Interesting.
he met my mother and then he moved back to Mobile and went to get his job back at Mobile Steel Company. And Milton, the guy that was chief draftsman, asked him what he learned while he was at that sweatshop. And that was a true sweatshop because they painted the windows black so you couldn't see out.
Yeah.
And he says, I learned a lot. He says, but I still can't detail stairs. Wrong thing to say. After that, he said every job that had stairs in it that came into that drawing room to that fab shop, he had to draw them.
Yeah. Well,
and he was a true stair master. There was
gonna say, yeah, he probably learned real quick then.
He could draw stairs, and I mean curved stairs, spiral stairs. I mean, yeah, he could do it all on the board,
Yeah. Yeah.
And but anyway, that's why he had that intricate system of because he had seen so many stairs in his career, he had standardized it in his mind,
Yeah.
And so, but of course, and then SDS2 started doing stairs. So, and of course, he never liked the way they were dimensioned. And those aren't dimensioned right. You got to do them this way.
Sure. Yeah.
He always told me on a stair, you put your reference dimensions above the stringer.
Mm-hmm.
And below the stringer is the shop dimensions, all the dimensions that the shop needs to, like punch holes, cut length, all that kind of stuff goes underneath the stair.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't do it 100% that way because, like, if you got handrail holes or something, obviously you got to put them on the top. But
there's always exceptions to every rule, right?
Oh yeah, especially with detailing. But anyway, that Nippon steel job that we did that for Boardman Steel in Youngstown, Ohio, and they were looking at buying SDS2, and they flew out here and they brought 3 jobs with them, and we had never done any work for them. And Glenn Johnson, I think, he was an engineer. He didn't own the company, but he was kind of one of the right-hand men. And Dave Dybel, I think him and his dad owned it. Anyway, they wanted us to bid those jobs. So whenever Dad started bidding these 3 jobs, and he cut that one with Nippon Steel, that big old monstrosity, and I said, if you bid that, I said, you better figure on buying at least 3 or 4 more computers. I said, because I was the only one running the computer then.
Yeah.
And so he bid it and thought he put a lot of money in it. Yeah. But that's the one we ended up getting. So anyway, we detailed that job, and then near as I can tell, that job went together pretty good. I mean, I know the guy, some Japanese guy that was in charge of it, he resigned in disgrace after the job because it went so long. It went over its time frame. Yeah. Wow. But it was from the drawings we had to work from. I mean, you just couldn't make any time with it, and you're having to get faxes from Japan. It's like, you guys didn't factor all this in, did you?
Yeah.
But it went over twice the price in revisions before it was all done.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was like $100,000 job, and it was over $200,000 time we were done.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's some of those jobs, they look real good and easy, and then they come back around. It's like, oh, I wish I'd never gotten wrapped up in this
Yeah.
mess,
And
But
once you start digging in, things can change pretty quickly, I would say sometimes.
I guess probably you don't have it on your list there, but I guess probably the most interesting job I did was back in '89, and this was in version 4, I think, before we had the solid modeling. And I've got pictures from the job site on it, but we did Barbie Benton's house up in Aspen, Colorado.
Okay.
And it was 50,000 square feet house.
A home.
And
Wow.
it only had 5 bedrooms, but it had 14 bathrooms.
Yeah, well.
And it had, I don't know how many miles of brass handrail it had in it, but
Wow.
it was built on it. You can see it if you know where to look on Google Maps. You can see it up there, but sometime I'll try to find a pin to it. It looks like a bug from the air.
Huh.
But it had 2 lap pools, one for her and one for him, which she was married to, and I think she still is married to a guy by the name of Gradow. He's some Hollywood lawyer or something. He financed help finance Back to the Future movies and stuff.
Yeah.
But it had 2 lap pools, his and hers, up on the very top tier. And because she liked her pool to be a little bit warmer than him.
I suppose if you got the money, spend it.
Yeah.
You can't take it with you when you go.
It had a gymnasium, it had a recording studio, it had a discotheque, it had a dance floor, and it was featured on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. I think you can get if you ever find an old episode of that takes you through it after it's finished. But it was just a geometric nightmare. It had these 4 cylinders, concrete cylinders that stair stepped up the hill, and those cylinders were kind of the main point of each quadrant of the house. And coming off of these cylinders, there was embeds, and there was these beams that went up that held up the floors, and they were, of course, spaced around the arc, that cylinder. And we didn't have any. We had the 3D stick, but we didn't have the solid modeling, So
Sure.
you had to kind of basically once you got the beam, a picture of it, then you had to draw the rest of it and project it, and because everything was double miter cut on the top but that was an interesting job. But
sounds like a fun one. So
and ended up having to lean the job to get paid.
Oh.
For $5,000. It was a $50 million house, and we were trying to get $5,000 out of it. And my dad he was just beside himself. He says, I'm going to lean it, and I'm going to take the lien papers, I'm sticking them in his desk drawer, and I'm going to forget about it.
Yeah.
And it was about a year later, he got a call from the contractor and he said, Mr. Gradow would like to borrow another $1 million to finish his house, and he can't because you have a lien on it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't it was the fabricator that. And anyway, it's a long story. There was some shenanigans at the fabricator, some embezzling that was going on.
Oh.
They were covering it with fictitious back charges, and
Got it.
It was a mess. But anyway, contractor paid us, and we got our money.
There you go. Well, Chris, my glass is empty here. It's just ice melting in the bottom.
Where the heck is the bottle?
I can't. I gotta go home at some point. I can't sleep in the office here. I'm gonna have to drive home. So
don't want you getting.
Can't be drinking all night.
Yeah. But
so no, look, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you spending the hour with me here and chatting with me here. It's always a pleasure. So I think I get a little bit of a history lesson every time I sit down and talk with you. So it was a whole new history lesson here today. So yeah, it was very
Yeah,
interesting.
you should we should get an episode with me and Dave Henniger and
Oh, I don't know if
both
I want to do that. We'd never
Bill
stop. We'd
Pitlack,
never hear
Bill
the end of
Pitlack and Doug Ditzkiewicz. Have us a party.
Oh yes. Oh
We could give you
yes.
some good history then.
Yeah, we'd have to cut so much of it out though that
Oh
I'm
yeah,
not sure there would be anything left.
yeah. But oh, that was the other thing we didn't mention
Yeah.
too. I've been, uh, advisory board member
Yeah.
through the years, off and on, and
Yeah.
so in users group. I don't know if I'll get there this year or not. It's close enough I can drive.
Yep. Hey, we're in Omaha again this year, so would love to have you.
We'll see what transpires between now and then.
Yeah.
We may all be in the poorhouse before then.
Oh well, we
hope not, but
it's only a couple months away, so I think we're safe
Yeah.
for a couple months at least. So
I might have to. We'll see. And of course, my son would like to come because he works for Hal down at Cartee-Berry too.
yeah.
So
yeah,
I don't think we mentioned that. That's where I'm at now, is Cartee-Berry.
Very good.
Working with Hal, and I think he's still on the advisory board.
Oh yeah. Talk to Hal pretty regularly. So
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm
okay.
always out here, and you can get me anytime.
All
Usually
right.
I'm on Discord. Discord on there.
Perfect.
So yeah, lots of ways to communicate anymore. So
Yes, sir.
well,
Very
hey,
good. Yeah.
have a good Friday night. Be careful going home.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll have to, like I said, do this again sometime. Get
Yes, sir.
maybe after hours sometime.
Maybe after hours. That sounds like
Yeah.
a better deal. Yeah. So
Yeah.
probably safer that way. So
Get some other people. Get some other people on here.
Oh yes. All
All
right.
right.
Thank you
Well,
very much, Chris. Thanks
yeah.
everybody for watching another episode of Steel and Whiskey, and we'll see y'all next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.